Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 96 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by Trellance, from data to insight, the right way. My name is Randy Smith. I am one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Lucy Ito. Lucy is the president and CEO of NASCUS, the National Association of State Credit Union Supervisors. This episode was a long time coming. Lucy and I had planned to sit down in California at an event that was one of the first to be canceled because of this thing we call COVID. I can tell you one thing. It was worth the wait. We talked about credit unions and their relationship with regulators. Lucy has such an interesting seat at the table on this, perspective on it all. She brings leaders together from both sides and has them at the same table. Very cool part of this conversation. Of course, we talked a lot about leadership lessons learned, staying connected in remote environments, and even Lucy's quest to make the perfect granola. I'm looking forward to getting some of her next batch in the mail when it's done. As always, we close the show with the rapid fire questions. What did Lucy want to be when she grew up? I'll give you a hint. 3 letters, RBG. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Lucy Ito. Enjoy. Lucy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Randy. So good to be with you.
I've been excited for our conversation, and I can tell you, I'm doing some homework even got me more excited. We've met multiple times before, but I didn't know a lot of the history. So I was really looking forward to this. You know, I'd like to start, and it's a question I've been asking the past couple of months, but it's interesting because I think it's not something that's probably going to change even after the pandemic is over to some level, is this remote work thing. Have there been any hacks? I know you go from both sides of the country. Staying connected in this kind of digital, maybe not as much face-to-face, interpersonal world, whether it's with your team or just with the folks you represent?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. In some ways, I find virtual contact to be, in some ways, more personal. We do a weekly staff huddle, and we used to meet in our conference room every Tuesday. Now we're spread throughout the country. And what I like about it is when you're in person, I can maintain eye contact with only one person at a time, and I have to look around. On Zoom or whatever platform you're using, I like it because I can see multiple faces at the same time. So I feel like I can kind of gauge what the mood is better.
Reading the room,
that's,
right?
Yeah. So that's actually been a nice surprise, even though, like everyone else, the Zoom after Zoom after Zoom, it's like, okay, let me see a real person, but that's been nice. And I do have a really funny hack. I'm still working on it. I got to show you. I'm just going to reach back, and your audience won't be able to see, but you'll be able to see.
We'll explain it to them.
Yes. So here it is. This is my pop-up green screen that is just hysterical. Watch this.
Oh, this has got to be amazing. I think somebody else has one of those that I saw, like Lynette Smith or something like that. Oh, yep. I've seen that before. We might need to invest in one of those.
Yeah. And you put it on your chair. So I'm going to put it on my chair to show you, but I'll take it down because it's also distracting. But it sits on the back of your chair like this. And then, I'm on wheels and a swivel. And so you kind of feel like a peacock.
That's hilarious.
It is hilarious.
So I'm sure that must help with the virtual Zoom backgrounds or whatever they call them. Okay.
Yes. It's very fun.
You don't look all funky. Well, we'll have to link to those. I think it was Lynette Smith I saw who had one of those also on a call I was just on with her. So that's a good idea since we're all probably going to be doing this for a while. So another question that I was interested to ask you is, none of us have been through this type of experience before, as far as the true global pandemic. How have you personally grown as a leader over the past 6 months now, basically?
Yeah, I was always open to remote working and whatnot, but I have to admit that I did not think it would be possible to onboard new staff remotely. So we had hired somebody in the first week of March, and she was supposed to start on March 17th. So, things explode in the US. And so we contacted her and said, at that time, we didn't know exactly how long things were going to take. So we agreed with her, let's just put off your start date for a couple months. And, so March, April, May goes by, and someone we really wanted to hire, we use Plexity, and our HR advisor there said, if you want to keep her, you should start. And the reason we hadn't had her start is we couldn't imagine onboarding her remotely. And then we didn't want to lose her. So we hired her. And even though she's only met a couple of us in person back during the interviews, she now knows everybody, but virtually. And it's been fine. And so I'm much more open to not just working. I always thought remote work made sense, but being able to onboard new staff. And it's, maybe not ideal, but it you can make it work. And, necessity makes us figure things out.
A couple things on that. We just hired 2 new people at CUInsight who started yesterday from the time we're recording this. So it's Lauren is going through a similar thing now, bringing them on board, just completely in this environment. But like early, I don't know if it was early on, but within the first couple months, James Weilman up in Alaska, he was talking about that kind of that same thing. But to him, it was like it opened up his employee pool. Like he didn't have to have somebody relocate to Alaska now because even the people there were. So I thought that was an interesting thing how maybe for credit unions where we've always hired very locally or people had to relocate, how much of it's like, that's the best CFO for the job. Mm-hmm. Sure, you can live wherever you want, right? It's pretty interesting. When you're working with the state regulators from coast to coast, what are the biggest concerns that you're hearing, in this not only current environment, but, I think most of us feel it could be a tough time going forward. So
yes. Yeah. And it's interesting. I think you'll be surprised at the answer. State regulators sound a lot like credit unions and what they're worried about. So right now, what's on at the front of everyone's mind is how are institutions going to deal with the end of loan accommodations? Are there going to be additional ones? If they come all at one time, how are financial institutions going to handle that? And they're really worried about consistency in supervision between state regulators and NCUA and other federal regulators. They're really concerned about that, remembering the last crisis and what happened. Certain announcements were made federally early on in the crisis, and then when it came down to actually examining credit unions was difficult for both examiners and for credit unions. So that's what they're worried about, that coordination between different types of regulators and that consistency.
Jill and I both are on a CEO call that we've just kind of been on throughout the whole thing, where we just get together with a group of folks and, a couple times a month. But that to me, I think even early on was one of the big concerns that I was hearing was, okay, you're telling us to do everything right now that we can to help the members to get us through this, but how are we going to be judged on this a year from now, 18 months from now, or whatever, like having that type of consistency. So yeah, that's a lot of interesting stuff. This is a question that I've asked for almost the 2 years of the podcast. But I was really interested to get your perspective kind of on 2 different sides of this. There's been a ton of disruption even before the pandemic, right? Like in financial services overall, fintechs thing, a lot of changes going on. I've been so impressed on how quick credit unions have pivoted and moved during this pandemic. It's generally not in our nature to move quick, but I think we've done a fantastic job. Has there been I'll ask kind of in 2 parts. Has there been a big change that you've seen happen in the way credit unions are kind of serving the members? And on the flip side of that, is there something that you think they need to do differently, or maybe even the regulators think that they need to do differently moving forward to stay competitive in this environment, right?
Yeah. So in terms of the response, I do think that credit unions always shine in crisis. And so, yes, when things are quote unquote normal, credit unions may not move as quickly as some other institutions, but in a crisis, boom, crisis after crisis, credit unions have always proven themselves. So I was shocked at the speed of adjusting to social distancing, to teleworking, everything that credit unions did to be able to have their staff work from home, as well as make it possible for their members to access services online. But I think there's still more that needed. And I think what I worry about is, I think crises that happen and then are over they're difficult, but they're, I think, easier. There's a kind of a post-crisis time. This time, it's this slow drip It's just extending and extending. And so, I do worry not just for credit unions, but all of us, how we battle the fatigue. And then, looking forward, I think that two things. One, credit unions really have to continue to adjust to consumers' expectations in being able to do everything conveniently, online, digitally. So, that's just never going to end. We've all come to expect a certain level of service because we've experienced Amazon.
Yep.
And it's that same kind of, that's what consumers expect now. So, including all of us personally.
Absolutely.
And then I do worry for credit unions' competitiveness. I think we need to rethink fields of membership. And even though, we've got a history of that, as the world is changing and relying on digital access, I think we need to rethink common bonds and the barriers to entry if we have the historical fields of membership continue. And that's both a credit union and a regulator challenge.
That's an interesting point you make there. That totally has my head thinking and spinning, right? One of the things, and I've had conversations with Jill about this before and others in the industry, is that idea of common bond kind of changes, right? Like we're very much more, I've lived in multiple states over the past decade, right? Like I didn't need to change my credit union because I've moved anymore, but the bond that I had to the original one in Michigan is no longer there, right? Like, and you start to think about people changing careers much more often, and like, what are these bonds that actually connect us?
Yeah. So we just last week we had a great discussion with this particular discussion was with state regulators on thinking about the future of fields of membership and interstate branching. So the federal and state systems are now 50% each in assets and memberships. Most people, there are more federal credit unions, but a lot of them tend to be smaller. But when you look at system assets, it's literally 50-50. And we were talking about what used to be and it continues to be an advantage of the federal charter is interstate branching. And some states, most states actually allow it, but it's just not an automatic. You have to get permission in the state that you want to go to and whatnot. Whereas with federal credit unions, you don't need that. But we started, historically, we would talk about interstate branching with literal branches.
Yeah.
But really, it's about now interstate operations. And we had a great discussion of states scratching their heads on would they seek permission, would they want to be able to give permission where someone's simply serving someone who moved from Michigan and now lives in California or Connecticut, wherever. And it's fascinating, all those questions. If it's not a brick and mortar branch, then, can a person be a member from another state? And you can, is this a natural, in the old days, when you moved, you would give up your relationship, but today, you don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. That's a great discussion point. It's also, to me, from the credit union standpoint, I mean, what are you doing to maybe expand that untraditional common bond, right? The last question in this section, if we're to sit down a year from now, what are you most proud of that you and your team at NASCUS have accomplished? If you had to break out the foggy crystal ball for me.
Yeah. Great question. So here we are in October 2021, and we would look back and what we'd be proud of is if we were able to get state regulators and NCUA to coordinate. And I would love for credit union states to say, hey, NCUA and the state regulator were in our shop and they were flying information. They were on the same page, and the credit union too, that would be amazing. And also I would expect that by next year, we'll look back and be proud of ourselves that we brought credit unions to the table with regulators to give that reality check. So come up with solutions. And we really take pride in making sure that regulators and credit unions solve problems together. If regulators do it on their own, they're not going to have the reality check that credit unions bring. So my expectation is we'll be doing a lot of that, bringing credit unions and regulators together.
That was something that I noticed, and I apologize for the ignorance beforehand on this, but when I was going through your website. So, I mean, you have your board of state regulators, but you also have a credit union. I don't know if committee is the right term, but so those two, I guess you could say, do they play together and make sure we're...
Yes. And so, I'm so glad that you noticed that on our website. So internally, we refer to it as joint leadership. So we have two leadership bodies, as you said, the 8-person regulator board, 8-person credit union advisory council. And they always meet together.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And anyone, it doesn't matter which group you're in, anyone can move or second a motion. And then when it comes to voting, the credit union council votes first to register their recommendation to the regulator board. And then the regulator board votes. And in my 6 years at NASCUS, the credit union advisory council and the regulator board have always agreed. They've always voted on things the same. So it's... There
has to be some conversation and connection beforehand for that to happen, right? To be coming to an equal place. And then they say, you guys must bring them together, right? So
it works a lot better when we're together and everyone hears the same thing. And it's very fun.
Yeah, I had no knowledge of that. And when I was doing some homework, so that was one of the things I'm glad we were able to bring that up and hear more about that. On to the second part of the show, the leadership and life hacks. Just to start, what inspired you to take the gig back in 2014, become the president and CEO?
Yeah, it's pretty funny. So when the recruiter called me on the phone, he asked, this job is open. Would you be interested? And he couldn't hear me. I was just shaking my head, no. And he goes, would you, I'm not interested. And then he said, should I just keep you posted? And so I said, okay, sure. What hurts? Why would it hurt to just keep me posted? So I said, sure, even though I was convinced. Why would I want to lead an organization where you've got the conflict between the regulator and the regulated? I just thought, no, thank you. But what finally, I kind of went through the process thinking, okay, it's good practice. And in the end, what made me actually finally decide, wow, I really want to be part of this organization is it was back when the first risk-based capital rule was proposed by NCUA. And I read the comment letter that NASCUS submitted. And I had never seen a letter before that took both the regulator view and the credit union view and brought them together in a very common sense, objective, constructive. I was just blown away and going, wow, if this is the kind of stuff that we do, that we bring these two groups together and solve the problems together, then yeah, I'm interested. And then, certainly the dual charter system. I am such a believer in it. And even though we're focused on state chartered credit unions, I feel very strongly that what we do in the state system helps the federal system, because the way the dual charter system works, states put pressure on the federal charter to make changes and vice versa. Any changes in the federal charter then puts pressure on state regulators to keep up. It's a very healthy competition attention that is very welcome. It ends up helping credit unions. It ends up helping consumers.
Absolutely. Wow. That's really cool. Has the inspiration changed since you got the job?
So it's still very much, I do love the dual charter system and bringing folks together. It still really turns me on. The surprises have been, we were talking before about our two leadership bodies. So whether it's there or in our committees, all of our committees also are combined regulators and industry. And I love when I hear a regulator say, if I was a credit union, I'd be really concerned about XYZ. And then in turn, we also always hear credit unions going, if I was a regulator, this is what I would watch out for. And so that's so fun for them to step into each other's shoes. That really excites me. And a surprise for me is before I got to NASCUS, being from credit union land, I had the belief, and I'll call it a bias. I thought that a standalone credit union department was preferred. I'm now neutral on that. They're great. Standalone departments are great. They're focused. They really understand credit unions. But many of our state agencies are over both banks and credit unions and other financial service providers. And what I've learned from the combined agencies is they have a really good sense of relative risk of credit unions because they do things in the banking area.
That makes sense.
And so they're able to say, well, we've done that with our banking institutions, and this is what we learned on the banking side. So it's really helpful for us to have that banking perspective to inform what's going on in the credit union side, and vice versa. They will take what's going on in the credit union side and be able to learn from that when they're supervising banks. So it's that was a surprise, and I think a good thing for credit unions.
I have to ask, most of our listeners are obviously credit union folks. If credit unions want to get more involved, if there's a CEO out there who's like, I'd like to be on that board or that type of thing, is it just reaching out to you directly? Is there a way to do that through the site?
Folks can either go to our site, we have a contact us, they can put their question in there, but folks can just email me directly, call me. Yeah.
Get a hold of Lucy.
Please.
That's awesome. I have to just to quickly ask this question. How would you describe your leadership style? It sounds like to be good at the position you're in, you got to be pretty collaborative and bring people together. So
I would say I'm a collaborative person. I really, we're so small, we can't do it all. And so, we have to lean on others. And I think the quality of solutions, I really believe in reaching out and being informed instead of doing things on our own. I would say in terms of personal management style, I think I'm hands off, and I really do well with colleagues who own whatever their projects are, whatever their responsibility is, and run with it. And I really encourage, I don't want colleagues to be afraid of making mistakes. Mistakes are great because we learn from them. We just have to make sure we learn from them.
That's the important part of those mistakes, right? Speaking of your colleagues, is there something they've heard you say so many times they can finish your sentence?
I think probably the thing that I say most often to staff repeatedly is family first. And what's good for the employee is usually good for the organization. And so, I just say, take care of your family, or if something's going on, what's good for you is probably good for NASCUS.
There's been a lot of that over the past few months, probably even more, right? Like we have all have so many different things happening and going on. So this kind of goes back down to that decision-making process, I guess you would say. But like as a leader, often like you kind of have to make that final decision. And sometimes it might not be the popular decision. Is that something that you always kind of had the ability to do, something that was in you, or is it something that you kind of had to maybe mature with over your career, making that tough decision on the spot?
I think I've always had it. So starting at World Council and then moving to California, Nevada Leagues, and then at NASCUS, in my entire credit union career, I have always told myself that I have to put the organization's interests before my own. And that's just the way that I'm wired, probably from my parents.
Yeah.
And so, but it does mean tough decisions. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's for sure. Is there a common myth about being a good leader or leadership in general that you would just want to debunk?
Yeah, leaders, a single leader doesn't have all the answers. It's like the best answers come from asking questions and learning from other people. So yeah, I would say that even though sometimes, folks will say, come on, you're our leader. What's the answer? I need your help. My response is, I need your help to figure it out.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great point to make. Often people look up to the CEO and think that they have every single answer, but there are folks too, right? There's people. When you think back to earlier in your career, was there a mistake that you made, or to even expand this out a little bit, you mentioned being at the league and at WOCU and now with NASCUS. Is there a mistake that you see that kind of young leader, first time leader make that we almost, that mistake we all just kind of have to make almost, it seems like?
Yeah. And I would say that I did this myself and I see it in others. People try to be self-sufficient and, it's efficient and they don't want to bother others. But, silos end up taking time, consuming time. So reach out, collaborate, ask for help. Ask for help. Don't try to do it on your own.
The great thing is we work in an industry that people are just so willing to help us. So it's just the kindest group of people. That if you reach out, there's plenty of people that are willing to give you some advice or help along the way. So has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you received that you find yourself going back to often over your career?
Yeah, and I don't remember receiving this, but it's certainly kind of a mantra when it's tough to decide what to do. I have always tried to live by this. Do the right thing, even if nobody's looking.
Yeah. That's good stuff. Generally, that means we're going to make the right decisions, right? So, one of the things that I mentioned early in the first season, and it's kind of continued here into the second, was how important mentors or that strong network around, many of the guests were. I mean, quite honestly, and how that helped their careers and just even, socially and personally. Did you have mentors as you were coming up? Do you still have mentors? And how has that network, I guess, helped you advance in your career?
Mm-hmm. Tons of folks, but in terms of mentors, so Dave Chatfield, Bill Cheney, Diana Dykstra, they were all CEOs of the California Nevada leagues during my time there. I think I was there for 10 years, I think it was. And each one of them, the common denominator among them is how open they were, how inclusive they were. And all of them made me feel so welcome and that I could ask them for advice and whatnot. And they went from being bosses to becoming very dear friends. And so I try to be as inclusive as they were to me. I try to be that way. And just incredible people, so generous, so giving. And, we are very lucky. The credit union system attracts people like this. And it's another surprise for me. People laugh when they hear this. I find regulators and credit unions are so similar because they've got this purpose that they take seriously. And it's kind of funny that I find them to be very well matched. It's why our regulator leadership and our credit union leadership get along so well. And they're just, there's this calling of sorts that, we're there to protect consumers.
You had some great mentors. Diana and Bill were both on the show before, so I had two of my favorite people. That's good stuff. Before we move on to the last part of the show, if there's a free day, there's nothing on the calendar, you're not traveling from coast to coast, what do you do to unwind? What does that work-life integration look like to you? What makes Lucy happy?
I really enjoy cooking. And
I've been to your house once before. It was amazing. So
that was so much fun. And so that's the way I relax. And I've been laughing. So I've been eating a lot more. And Rob cooks a lot. And, will bring me lunch during the day. That's been a really nice perk. So we were calling it the quarantine 15, the weight that we've gained. And then if I don't start exercising again, which has really plummeted since this all started, it's going to be my COVID-19 is what I'm going to end up gaining. But I need to get back out jogging. So that's something else that usually helps me relax, but I have not been giving it as much time as I should. So.
I am with you on that.
Cooking wise, if you and Jill like granola, one of the things I've been doing over the last several months is I've been perfecting my granola recipe, and I don't have it down yet. I've got like 4 or 5 versions of it. I keep saying the next one's going to be perfect, and I haven't hit perfection yet. But next batch of granola I make, I'll send you.
We would love that. We've actually been eating a lot of granola in quarantine with yogurt and fruit, and so we've been home so much. We've subscribed to different meal services. So there's a local farm that delivers like stuff, and one of their choices every week is granola. So we would love to try yours. That sounds amazing.
It's next batch will be on its way to you.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm all excited. So on to the last part of the show. I want to be respectful of your time. These are the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. What were you like in high school? And do you remember the first time you got in memorable trouble? And if you can beat Diana, that would be unbelievable, but I don't think anybody ever will. So,
I think in high school, I had the reputation. My friends' parents trusted me, but I drove a lot faster than I should have. And I didn't get caught, but let's just say if I was 16, 17 years old again, I would drive more slowly than I did back then.
Than you did back then. Well, I don't think, I know Diana's a good friend of yours, but hers was Grand Theft Auto. So I don't think anyone's ever going to beat that. But I know you know that story. But, so most of us, we've talked about how much we love being in the credit union movement. But most of us did stumble into a career in credit unions in one way or another. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a Supreme Court justice.
Oh, geez, we could use you now. So, goodness, that's awesome. So, did you go into law? Was it something you pursued, or?
I started law school. I went straight from college to law school, and I went to Northeastern in Boston, and it's a school that's actually known for people going back to school after being out in the work world.
Okay.
So after my first year, I thought, you know what, Lucy, there's like so much of the world still to learn about. You can always continue law school, go out and do some other things that you're interested in. And then if you want to continue with law school, you have that option. I was so focused on sticking to this plan that I had. And so it was great going to this school where I saw people with all this life experience. So I stopped, and then I actually went into something I wanted to study. I did a master's in linguistics, and then became clear, starting to do PhD work. And it became clear Rob and I wouldn't probably be able to live in the same place if I stayed on that path. So I pulled back from the PhD work, and then that's when I fell into this research job at the World Council.
Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you, but we'd like to have you on the court too. So selfish reasons there. Do you have any daily routines that if you don't do, your day just feels off?
Yeah. So I get up and I listen to NPR. And if I don't, then I feel like I don't know what happened overnight in the world. And so I feel off.
I understand that. I can't get in the car without turning NPR on personally. I feel like I catch up on so much stuff during that time. The random question, what's the best album of all time? That one you could listen to without skipping a song?
That's a hard question, but I decided it's the Decemberists, The Crane Wife. It's beautiful music, a beautiful story.
Very cool. I'm a reader. You can see behind us. You mentioned that before the people listening can't see behind us, but Jill and I have a stack of books all around the house, and it keeps growing because people on the show keep making amazing recommendations. And I know when I sent you the questions, you mentioned Sudoku, the Japanese word of piling up reading material around our home. And I keep meaning to find this old article, but they actually said there was an article that showed that you actually become more intelligent just by having a bunch of books that someday you may never get to them all, but the idea of it, the curiosity actually helps, right? But I digress. Is there a book that either you've gifted others or that you just think everybody should read?
Yeah, so the book I've gifted the most often is actually a cookbook. It's called The Cuisine of California by Diane Rawson Worthington. Ooh. And it's now been reprinted, but back when it wasn't, every town I went to, I'd go to a used bookstore and find it so that I would have it to give to friends. And then a non-cooking one, my sister gave these to me when I unfortunately got in an accident and was not able to, I was bedridden for a while. And it's the Nursery Crimes. It's this, not a trilogy, but a series of stories by Jasper Fforde. I think he's Welsh, if I'm not mistaken. And oh my gosh, you can't put them down. So if anyone's ever recovering from something, great read, just hysterical. And it's like, one solves the mystery of, was Humpty Dumpty murdered? Did someone push him off the wall? And the fourth bear for Goldilocks, and it's not three bears, but the fourth bear. Hilarious, wonderful writing.
What was the name of the series? I've not heard of this before.
They call them the Nursery Crimes instead of Nursery Rhymes.
Instead of the rhymes.
Yeah,
okay.
And it's fantastic. It really is fantastic readings.
That's
very,
good
very
stuff.
enjoyable.
And then those are two new ones for the book list. So I love it. As you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question, what's become less important?
Yeah. So, more important is time with family. Rob and I come from a very large family, so that's become more important. And less important, it's like worrying about what other people think. What other people think that doesn't worry me anymore. It used to.
It always took up so much mental space for all of us before.
Exactly.
It seems like we should have so much more we can think about now. This has been so much fun. The last question that I have for you is, do you have any final asks of our listeners or final thoughts you'd like to share?
Thank you to everyone. And if anyone wants to sample my granola, let me know.
Well, I'm excited. I'm raising my hand, so we would love to try it. That's for sure. And, we can't wait to see you again and to be able to move freely about the country. We'll link to everything we talked about in the show notes, the books, the music, everything that you have going on there. If people want to get a hold of you, if they have additional questions, is LinkedIn, the Twitter machine, email? What's your poison, I guess? How do you like people to reach out to you?
Any way that people want to. I'm not very active on Twitter. I do LinkedIn and email calls. So we'd love to hear from folks.
That is awesome. Like I said, we'll link to all that in the show notes. Thank you again, Lucy, for taking the time today. I hope you stay healthy, my friend, and have an amazing day.
Thanks so much, Randy. All the best to you and Jill.
Before we go, I would like to take a moment to send out a huge thank you to all of you for listening. We couldn't have this much fun doing what we do without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Once again, a big thank you to Lucy for taking the time out of her busy schedule to share those experiences with all of us. And a big thank you to our sponsors, Trellance. Our friends at Trellance have been longtime partners and supporters of ours at CUInsight.com. So make sure to click on their link in the show notes, give them some love, see everything that they have going on, transforming data into actionable insights for credit unions across the country. And don't forget, last thing about the CUInsight Experience podcast book list. If you need some stimulation for the old mind, we have you covered. Get your next book recommendation from the guests on our show. Lucy, I will say, added a few to that list today. So thank you all again for listening. Have a great day, and please stay well, friends.